My mother created fake profiles pretending to be me and sent horrible messages to my children. They blocked me, and today, 4 years later, they discovered the truth. I was in the hospital corridor when my phone rang with an unknown number, and my youngest son's voice on the other end said just one sentence before breaking into sobs. "Mom, Grandma lied about everything." I realized the last 4 years of my life had been stolen by a lie so cruel that my body simply froze there, while nurses rushed past me and the smell of disinfectant invaded my lungs as if suffocating me. My legs failed and I slid down the cold wall until I sat on the shiny linoleum floor, the phone still pressed to my ear. Hearing my son repeat broken apologies while my brain tried to process that the woman who gave birth to me, whom I loved unconditionally for 42 years, had deliberately destroyed my relationship with my 3 children, using words I never said, thoughts I never had. She created a monstrous version of myself that existed only in the fake profiles she controlled like an invisible puppet. The corridor spun around me and I could barely breathe, because for 1,460 days I woke up every morning not understanding what I had done that was so terrible for my own children to block me from their lives. Not knowing that each hate message they received had been typed by my mother's arthritic fingers. Each audio full of insults had been recorded by her voice perfectly imitating my tone. Each manipulated photo had been edited with a frightening dedication to detail. 4 years earlier, I was a present mother who had dinner with her children every Sunday, who knew every detail of their lives, who received daily calls asking for advice about relationships, careers, important adult life decisions. My house had a large wooden table where everyone gathered, where the sound of laughter mixed with the clatter of dishes and silverware. Stories were shared between sips of wine and pieces of dessert. I knew my oldest son's favorite coffee brand, knew that my middle daughter cried watching dog commercials, remembered that my youngest had been terrified of thunderstorms since childhood, and still called me when strong storms came to the city. We were a family that overcame a difficult divorce but kept our bonds intact, that transformed pain into unity, that proved that the love between mother and children could survive any storm. Or at least that's what I believed, sitting at that Sunday table, serving homemade lasagna while my mother smiled from across the table, guarding secrets I would never imagine existed behind that familiar face that rocked me when I was a child. The transformation began so subtly that I didn't even notice the cracks forming. My oldest son started responding to my messages less frequently. His responses became short, monosyllabic, as if each word cost a gigantic effort. My daughter stopped calling me crying after difficult shifts at the veterinary clinic. Those long, late-night conversations where I just listened and offered the silent comfort that only a mother can give. My youngest canceled 3 lunches in a row with vague excuses about accumulated work, urgent projects, unavoidable commitments that came up at the last minute. I felt something changing but couldn't identify what it was. Like when you notice a strange smell in the house but can't find the source, you just know something is wrong, rotten, hidden somewhere inaccessible. I tried to talk, asked if everything was okay, if I had done something to hurt them, but received only evasive answers and looks that didn't meet mine directly, as if my own children were ashamed to be in my presence. Then came the Sunday when no one showed up for dinner. I had prepared each of their favorite dishes, had set the table with the good tablecloths, had bought fresh flowers for the centerpiece because it was my oldest son's birthday, and I wanted everything to be perfect. I kept waiting with the food getting cold on the plates, the wall clock marking each passing minute with a tick-tock that echoed through the empty house like the beats of a lonely heart. I called all 3, sent messages, even drove to my oldest son's house and knocked on the door for 10 minutes while seeing the lights on inside and shadows moving behind the curtains, knowing he was there but choosing not to answer, leaving me outside like an unwanted stranger. I came home with my hands shaking on the steering wheel, with tears blurring my vision, with a hole in my chest that seemed to suck all the air from my lungs, not understanding what was happening, not knowing that at that exact moment my mother was in her apartment, just 10 blocks away, smiling as she deleted the messages she had sent from the fake profile, satisfied with another day's work in the meticulous destruction of my life. In the following days, I discovered I was blocked. Not just on one app, but on all of them. Social media, messages, calls, email. My children had completely erased me from their digital lives, as if I were a dangerous virus that needed to be isolated and removed. I tried using the landline, but no one answered. I sent physical letters that came back unopened. I showed up at their workplaces, but polite security guards asked me to leave, saying there were specific instructions not to allow me in. I felt like a mad woman chasing ghosts, like a desperate mother in a psychological horror movie. Except that was my real nightmare, and I couldn't wake up from it. I cried until I had no more tears, screamed alone inside my car parked on empty streets, spent entire nights sitting in the dark living room trying to understand what absurd mistake I had made to deserve that absolute and inexplicable abandonment. My best friend Beatrice was the only person who refused to accept that I had simply gone crazy overnight. She had known me for 20 years, had witnessed me raising my children with devotion, had seen me navigate the divorce with maturity and grace, knew my character in a way that didn't align with the monster my children were now describing. When I showed up at her house at 3 a.m, barely able to speak through the sobs, she made tea, sat with me on the couch, and listened to every confused and desperate word that poured from my mouth. She didn't judge, didn't dismiss my pain, didn't suggest that maybe my children had good reasons I wasn't seeing. She simply believed me, which in those dark months was the lifeline that kept me from drowning completely. Beatrice began investigating on her own, using her training as a psychologist to analyze the situation from outside the emotional chaos consuming me. She asked detailed questions about the timeline, about when exactly the changes began, about who else was involved in my children's lives, about any patterns I might have missed. She created a literal timeline on her office wall, connecting dots with red string like a detective in a crime show, except the crime was the systematic destruction of my family, and the detective was my friend trying to save me from madness. She requested to see the last messages I had sent to my children before being blocked, which was impossible because I never sent any of the messages they claimed to have received. That inconsistency became the first thread she pulled, unraveling what would eventually reveal an elaborate web of deception. My mother visited me regularly during those 4 years, arriving with homemade food, concerned expressions, offers to help with anything I needed. She listened to me cry about the inexplicable loss of my children, patted my hand with false sympathy, told me that time would heal everything, that maybe they just needed space. She never suggested that I had done something wrong, which I appreciated at the time because everyone else seemed to think I was the problem. Now I understand that she was simply protecting her creation, maintaining the narrative while pretending to comfort the victim of her own cruelty. She sat in my living room drinking the coffee I made, watching me break apart piece by piece, and not only did she not feel remorse, she probably felt satisfaction. It's a level of evil I still can't fully comprehend even now knowing it's true. Because how does a mother derive pleasure from her daughter's complete destruction? What void exists in someone's soul that needs to be filled with the suffering of their own child? The psychological impact of those 4 years is impossible to fully quantify. I went to therapy 3 times a week, took antidepressants that barely dulled the edge of the pain, developed insomnia so severe that I sometimes went 3 days without real sleep, just brief, uncomfortable naps interrupted by nightmares. My work as a literature teacher suffered because I couldn't focus, couldn't find meaning in the books I taught, couldn't connect with students when I felt so disconnected from my own life. I took a leave of absence, then another, eventually going on long-term disability because getting out of bed felt like climbing a mountain. Every day without explanation felt like suffocation. My house became both refuge and prison, the place where I hid from a world that didn't make sense, where I sat in the dark replaying every interaction with my children trying to find the moment where everything went wrong. I stopped answering the door for anyone except Beatrice. Stopped checking social media even on alternate accounts because seeing glimpses of my children's lives continuing without me was torture worse than not seeing anything at all. I became a ghost in my own life, existing but not really living, surviving but not thriving, breathing but feeling like I was drowning with every breath. The weight loss was dramatic. 25 pounds in the first 3 months, another 15 in the next 6, until my clothes hung on my frame and people who saw me looked away quickly, uncomfortable with the visible evidence of suffering. I didn't care about food, about appearance, about maintaining the facade of normalcy when nothing was normal. Beatrice sometimes forced me to eat, bringing meals and sitting with me until I finished them, treating me like a child who needed supervision to complete basic self-care tasks. I was grateful for her persistence even when I resented it, grateful that someone cared enough to keep me alive when I wasn't sure I wanted to be. The loneliness was crushing in its completeness. My children had been my best friends, my daily companions, the people I shared everything with. Losing them all simultaneously created a void so enormous that nothing could fill it. I tried joining groups, volunteering, reconnecting with old acquaintances. But every interaction felt hollow because the only people I wanted to talk to had chosen to erase me from existence. I celebrated my birthday alone, spent holidays alone, marked every milestone without the people who made those moments meaningful. The silence was deafening. The empty chairs at my table a constant reminder of everything I had lost. The confusion was perhaps worse than the grief. Grief has a cause, a reason, something concrete to mourn. But I had no explanation, no closure, no understanding of what crime I had allegedly committed to deserve permanent exile. I reviewed every conversation, every visit, every decision I made as a mother, searching for the unforgivable sin that warranted complete abandonment. I found nothing. I wasn't a perfect mother. Nobody is. But I had loved my children fiercely, sacrificed for them willingly, supported them unconditionally through every phase of their lives. What could possibly justify this? My ex-husband Ricardo remained in contact with my children throughout those 4 years, which added another layer of pain to the situation. We had divorced 7 years earlier, a separation that was sad but relatively amicable given the circumstances. We had managed to remain civil, to co-parent effectively, to respect each other even when romantic love had faded. But now he saw our children regularly while I was excluded, heard about their lives while I knew nothing, participated in family events that I wasn't invited to. He never called to tell me what was happening, never tried to mediate or explain, and his silence felt like betrayal, even though logically I knew he was probably just respecting our children's wishes. Still, I wondered what he thought, whether he believed I had truly done something terrible, whether he defended me at all or simply accepted the narrative that I was now persona non grata in our children's lives. Beatrice worked methodically, gradually piecing together fragments of truth from careful investigation. She reached out to mutual friends, former colleagues, people on the periphery of my life who might have noticed things I missed. She searched public records, social media activity, any digital footprint that might reveal patterns. She became obsessed with solving the mystery, treating it like a case that needed cracking, because she couldn't accept that someone she knew so well could suddenly become unrecognizable. Her dedication probably saved my life, literally and figuratively, because I had given up trying to understand. The breakthrough came almost 2 years into the estrangement when Beatrice noticed something strange in online activity patterns. Someone was posting on social media pretending to be me, but the writing style was subtly different, the vocabulary slightly off, the timing inconsistent with my known schedule. She began documenting these discrepancies, creating screenshots, noting timestamps, tracking IP addresses through methods she probably shouldn't have been using, but justified as necessary under the circumstances. She found multiple fake accounts using variations of my name, profiles created with my photos but containing information that was wrong, subtly wrong in ways that someone who didn't know me well wouldn't notice. But Beatrice knew me. She recognized that whoever was creating these profiles had access to my photos and basic biographical information, but didn't truly understand my voice, my mannerisms, my personality. She started comparing the writing style in the fake profiles to people in my life, running them through linguistic analysis tools normally used in forensic psychology, looking for matches that might reveal the imposter. The match came back to my mother. Beatrice almost didn't believe it initially. Ran the analysis 3 more times thinking there must be an error, because who would suspect a 70-year-old grandmother of such sophisticated digital manipulation? But the patterns were consistent, undeniable, matching my mother's writing style with statistical significance that couldn't be dismissed. The vocabulary choices, the sentence structure, the particular phrases she favored, all of it pointed to Helena as the author of messages my children believed came from me. Beatrice sat with this information for weeks, verifying, gathering more evidence, building a case so solid that it couldn't be questioned or dismissed. She knew that accusing my mother would sound insane unless she had irrefutable proof. Confronting my mother directly was never an option because she would simply deny everything and possibly destroy evidence. Instead, Beatrice went to Pedro, my youngest son, because he had always been the most skeptical and analytical of my children, the one most likely to question his own assumptions if presented with compelling contrary evidence. She contacted him through LinkedIn, a professional platform where he might actually respond to a message from his mother's friend without immediately blocking. She wrote carefully, non-accusatorially, simply asking if he would meet with her to discuss new information about the situation with his mother. She emphasized that she wasn't trying to make him feel guilty, wasn't asking him to change his mind, just requesting an hour of his time to share what she had discovered. To her relief and surprise, he agreed to meet. The meeting happened at a neutral coffee shop on a Tuesday afternoon. Beatrice brought printed documents, screenshots, analysis reports, everything organized in a folder that she placed on the table between them. She didn't start with accusations or emotions. She started with data, with facts, with evidence that could be examined objectively without triggering defensive reactions. She showed him the fake profiles, pointed out the inconsistencies in writing style, demonstrated through timestamps that messages allegedly from me were sent during times when I was documented to be somewhere else, doing something else, teaching a class, attending a therapy session, places with verifiable records that provided alibis for crimes I didn't commit. Pedro listened without interrupting, his face growing paler as the evidence accumulated. He asked questions, challenged assumptions, looked for alternative explanations the way Beatrice knew he would, because that was his nature. She had anticipated every objection, had answers for every doubt, had built a case that withstood his scrutiny. When she finally revealed that the linguistic analysis pointed to his grandmother, he was silent for a long time, staring at the documents, at the evidence, at the undeniable pattern that implicated the woman who had been consoling him about his crazy mother for the past 2 years. He didn't want to believe it. Who would? But the evidence didn't care about his preferences, didn't adjust itself to be more comfortable or convenient. It simply was, cold and irrefutable and devastating. Pedro took the folder home, said he needed time to process. Beatrice gave him her number, told him to call anytime, day or night, if he had questions or needed support. She didn't hear from him for 3 weeks. 3 weeks where she worried she had miscalculated, that he had chosen comfortable lies over uncomfortable truth, that the family would remain fractured because facing reality was too painful. But then her phone rang late one night, Pedro's voice on the other end saying he needed help confronting his grandmother, that he had shown the evidence to his brother and sister, that they needed to know the full truth before deciding what to do next. The confrontation happened at Helena's apartment, all 3 of my children arriving unannounced with Beatrice present as witness and support. My mother tried to dismiss the accusations initially, acting shocked and hurt that her own grandchildren would believe such ridiculous conspiracy theories. But they didn't back down. Showed her the evidence, demanded explanations for the fake profiles, for the messages sent from IP addresses traced to her home, for the detailed knowledge of family information that the imposter possessed. She tried several deflections, claiming her accounts must have been hacked, that someone was framing her, that this was all a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. But Lucas, my engineer's son, had done his own investigation after Pedro shared the evidence. He had accessed server logs, traced digital footprints, found deleted emails in archived folders that showed premeditation and planning. He confronted her with technical specifics she couldn't explain away, timestamps and metadata that didn't lie, IP addresses that originated from devices she owned, patterns of activity that matched her daily schedule. The technical evidence combined with the linguistic analysis left no room for alternative explanations. She was cornered by her own digital trail, by the permanent records that exist in cyberspace even when we think we've erased them. Sophia, my veterinarian daughter, was the one who finally broke through the denials with a simple question. Why would you do this, Grandma? What did Mom ever do to you that was so terrible you needed to destroy our relationship with her? And something in that question, in the genuine confusion and pain in Sophia's voice, made my mother's facade crack. She didn't confess fully, didn't break down with remorse and apologize, but she stopped denying, stopped deflecting, just went quiet in a way that was admission enough. The silence confirmed everything, filled the room with the weight of undeniable guilt, made breathing difficult for everyone present. What emerged from subsequent conversations and investigations was a portrait of jealousy and resentment that had apparently festered for decades. My mother had always been controlling, I knew that, but I had interpreted it as typical maternal overprotectiveness rather than something darker. She had never forgiven me for divorcing Ricardo, not because she particularly liked him, but because divorce in her generation was shameful, a failure that reflected badly on her as a mother. She resented my close relationship with my children, feeling excluded and secondary in their lives. She was jealous of the family I had built, the bonds I shared with my kids, the modern casual intimacy that looked nothing like the formal distance she maintained with her own children growing up. The fake profiles began as small experiments, testing whether she could convincingly impersonate me online. Maybe initially it was just curiosity, a strange impulse that most people would recognize as wrong and stop. But she didn't stop. She discovered she was good at it, that she could fool people. That gave her a sense of power and control that must have been intoxicating for someone who felt powerless and irrelevant in her old age. She started sending messages to my children, subtle things at first, testing boundaries, seeing how much she could manipulate before getting caught. When they responded believing it was really me, when they started pulling away based on her fabrications, she didn't stop to consider the devastation she was causing. Or maybe she did consider it and didn't care, too invested in her game, too satisfied by the destruction to give it up. The messages got progressively worse over time, escalating from passive, aggressive comments to outright hostility. She sent texts late at night pretending to be drunk, rambling about how I felt they were ungrateful, how I regretted having children, how they had ruined my life. She created elaborate stories about things I allegedly said about them to others, gossiping about their failures, mocking their choices, undermining their accomplishments. She sent angry voicemails that she recorded in the middle of the night when her voice was hoarse, disguising it enough to pass as me in a rage. She edited photos to make it look like I was places I wasn't, with people I didn't know, creating visual evidence to support her textual lies. She befriended their social circles through fake accounts, spreading rumors, planting seeds of doubt about my mental stability, my character, my intentions. She contacted Ricardo pretending to be concerned about my behavior, showing him screenshots of the awful things she was allegedly receiving from me, enlisting him unknowingly as an ally. In verifying her narrative, she was meticulous, strategic, thinking several steps ahead like a chess master playing a game where the pieces were my relationships and the end game was my complete isolation. It was sociopathic in its execution, personal in its cruelty, and calculated in a way that suggested this wasn't impulsive madness but deliberate malice. The discovery shattered my children. The guilt they felt was crushing, made worse by the realization that they had spent 2 years pitying their grandmother, consoling her about her crazy daughter, giving her access to information about their lives that she used to make her impersonation more convincing. She had sat at their tables, played with her great-grandchildren, attended their events, all while maintaining the destruction of their relationship with me. They had trusted her completely, never suspecting that the sweet elderly woman baking cookies and asking about their days was the same person systematically poisoning their perception of their mother. Pedro called me first, that day in the hospital corridor, his voice breaking with guilt and grief, apologizing before explaining, as if the apology could somehow cushion the massive information bomb he was about to drop. He told me everything in fragments between sobs, about the fake profiles, the messages, the investigation, the confrontation, my mother's implicit admission. He said he was sorry approximately 37 times in that first conversation, saying it like a mantra, like if he repeated it enough, it would undo the damage of 2 years believing I was monster. Lucas called next, more composed but equally devastated. He explained the technical details, how the digital trail revealed the truth, how he had failed to see it earlier. He had a young son I had never met, a child almost 2 years old, whose entire existence happened during my exile. He started crying when he told me about that, about how his son would never know those early years with his grandmother because his father had believed lies over love. Sophia came to my house that evening, couldn't do the conversation over phone. She stood at my door looking destroyed, and when I opened the door, she collapsed into my arms, sobbing. We sank to the floor right there in the entryway, holding each other, crying together. 2 years of separation dissolving in tears and desperate embraces. She kept saying she should have known, should have trusted her instinct that something felt wrong, should have questioned more instead of accepting the narrative she was given. The reunion was beautiful and horrible simultaneously. Beautiful because I had my children back, because the nightmare was ending, because truth was finally revealed. Horrible because we had lost 2 years we could never get back, because the damage was deep and would take years to heal, because the person responsible was my mother, their grandmother, someone we all loved, someone who was supposed to protect family, not destroy it. How do you process that? How do you reconcile the grandmother who made pancakes on Sunday mornings with the woman who systematically tortured her own daughter through the alienation of her children? We had several family meetings, long, difficult conversations where everyone shared their experiences of the past 2 years. My children described the messages they received, the awful things they thought I said, the heartbreak of losing their mother to what they believed was mental illness or cruelty. I described my experience of inexplicable abandonment, the crushing loneliness, the desperate confusion, the suicidal thoughts that occasionally invaded when the pain became too much. Beatrice attended these meetings as mediator and professional support, helping us navigate conversations that frequently became too emotional to manage alone. We cried together, raged together, tried to make sense of something that would never fully make sense. The question of what to do about my mother was complex and divisive. Pedro wanted to pursue criminal charges immediately, to see her punished officially for what she had done. Sophia was torn between anger and guilt, struggling with the desire for justice versus the discomfort of sending an elderly woman to jail. Lucas wanted to cut her off completely but avoid legal action, believing that family shame and isolation would be punishment enough. I felt numb about the whole thing, too overwhelmed with getting my children back to have energy for deciding my mother's fate. Eventually, we agreed on a compromise. We would pursue legal action not necessarily for punishment but for documentation, creating an official record of what happened in case she ever tried to deny it or paint herself as the victim. We consulted with lawyers who specialized in cyber harassment and identity fraud, discovering that what she did actually violated multiple laws. The fake profiles, the impersonation, the intentional infliction of emotional distress, all of it had legal precedents and potential consequences. We filed reports, provided evidence, cooperated with investigators who seemed both fascinated and horrified by the case. My mother was eventually charged, faced legal proceedings that took months to resolve. She maintained that she had psychological issues, that she didn't fully understand what she was doing, that her age and isolation had impaired her judgment. The court appointed a psychiatric evaluation, which found her competent and fully aware of her actions, though possibly suffering from some personality disorder that made her incapable of empathy or remorse. She was convicted on multiple counts, received a suspended sentence due to her age and lack of criminal history, but the conviction was public record, permanent stain on her name and reputation. The extended family reacted with shock and disbelief when the truth emerged. Some relatives sided with my mother immediately, claiming we were all overreacting, that old people do strange things and shouldn't be judged harshly. Others were horrified, apologizing for not seeing the signs, for having believed her stories about my alleged instability. Family gatherings became awkward navigations of who stood where, who still maintained contact with her, who had chosen sides in a conflict that shouldn't have had sides because the facts were clear. Some relationships survived the revelation, others didn't. The family tree pruning itself according to who could accept truth versus who preferred comfortable denial. The first dinner together after the truth emerged was tentative and emotional. I cooked again, set the table again, waited again, but this time they came. Lucas arrived first with his wife and my grandson. I was meeting for the first time. The little boy had dark curly hair and my late father's eyes, and I cried holding him, mourning the babyhood I missed while simultaneously grateful for any time I would have with him going forward. Sophia came next, bringing her fiancé and enough wine for everyone to need several bottles. Pedro arrived last, always running late. Some things never change, and his arrival completed our circle. We sat around the table, that same wooden table where we had shared so many meals before the nightmare began. Nobody knew quite what to say at first, the weight of 2 lost years sitting heavy between us. But gradually conversations started flowing, awkward at first but gaining momentum. We laughed and cried in equal measure, told stories about the time we lost but also about the time we were reclaiming. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't magical healing that erased all damage, but it was start. And after 2 years of complete darkness, even a small start felt like miracle. Rebuilding trust was the hardest part. My children wanted to believe everything could go back to how it was before, but we all knew that was impossible. The betrayal they felt wasn't just from their grandmother, but from their own judgment, their own failure to question what they were being told. They had blocked their mother based on text messages and fake profiles without ever sitting down to have a real conversation, asking direct questions, demanding explanations face to face where lies are harder to maintain. That realization haunted them, made them doubt their own perceptiveness and judgment in ways that extended beyond our relationship. I struggled with my own trust issues, though I hated admitting it. Some part of me was terrified that this reunion was temporary, that they would disappear again, that I would wake up to find it was all a dream, and I was still in the nightmare. I was hyper-vigilant about communication, anxious when they didn't respond to messages immediately, interpreting any delay or short response as sign that they were pulling away again. It was exhausting for everyone. My anxiety feeding their guilt, feeding my anxiety and toxic cycle we had to consciously break. Therapy became mandatory for all of us, individually and as family. We needed professional help processing trauma this significant, developing tools to communicate effectively, learning to forgive ourselves and each other for roles we played in situations that nobody fully understood while it was happening. The therapist specialized in family reconciliation and cult deprogramming, because in many ways what happened was similar to cult manipulation, one person controlling information and perception to isolate target from support systems. The parallels were uncomfortable but accurate, and recognizing them helped us understand we had been victims of sophisticated psychological warfare rather than just gullible or stupid. Lucas and I had a long conversation about his divorce and how my mother tried to manipulate that situation too, planting seeds of distrust between Ricardo and me when we were negotiating terms of separation. We realized she had probably contributed to making the process more difficult than it needed to be, carrying distorted information from one side to the other, adding conflict where we could have maintained peace. It was an additional revelation about how far-reaching her manipulation went, probably poisoning family situations for decades without us realizing it. Ricardo and I spoke for the first time in years, a long and sometimes emotional discussion where we revisited past events through the new lens of understanding about my mother's interference. He apologized for believing the messages he received, for reinforcing the narrative with our kids that I was unstable. I explained that I didn't blame him any more than I blamed my children, that everyone had been victims of sophisticated manipulation executed by someone who knew exactly how to deceive each of us. We managed to finally have a respectful and even affectionate conversation, recognizing that although our marriage hadn't worked, we shared history and children, and those connections remained important. Months passed, and life gradually began to normalize into a new version that incorporated the reality of past trauma but wasn't defined exclusively by it. Sunday dinners became sacred. No family member missed them except for real emergencies. We celebrated birthdays we had missed, throwing retroactive parties with cakes and gifts, acknowledging the absurdity of commemorating past events, but needing that ritual of closure. We established new traditions while resuming old ones, creating a mixture of continuity and fresh start that reflected our complex journey. Sophia's wedding was a beautiful and emotional event where tears of joy were mixed with acute awareness of how close we came to losing that moment completely. When I walked with her down the aisle, when I placed her hand in the groom's hand, when I watched her say her vows with a voice trembling with emotion, I felt gratitude so profound it almost knocked me down. My mother had tried to steal this from us but failed in the end, and witnessing that moment was a victory over her attempt to permanently destroy our family. Pedro met someone a few months after the reunion, a serious relationship that progressed quickly, and he made a point of including me in every step. I met his girlfriend early, participated in double dates, offered my opinion when asked. He was clearly compensating for the years he kept me out of his life, including now as a way to correct the balance. I didn't mind the possible excess, accepting every invitation, participating in every event, grateful to have access again to that part of his life. Lucas and his wife announced a second pregnancy, and this time I would be present from the beginning. I attended prenatal appointments when invited, helped set up the baby's room, offered maternal wisdom accumulated from raising 3 children. When my grandson was born, I was at the hospital waiting, one of the first people to hold the new baby, participating in that sacred moment in a way that had been denied with the first grandchild. It was bittersweet because it reminded me of what I lost, but it was also healing because it proved that from then on I would be present for all important milestones. The legal process against my mother eventually resulted in conviction for multiple crimes, a sentence that included prison, but was suspended due to her age and lack of criminal record. She received community service, heavy fines, and a permanent no-contact order with serious legal consequences if she violated it. It wasn't the prison that part of us perhaps wanted as punitive justice, but it was official validation that what she did was wrong, criminal, deserving of formal consequences beyond just family rejection. She tried to contact us a few times despite the restraining order, sending letters through third parties, showing up at places where she knew we would be. Each time we simply documented the violation and reported it to authorities, maintaining emotional and physical distance. Eventually, the attempt stopped, and we heard through distant relatives that she had moved to another city, possibly trying to start over where her reputation wasn't ruined. We didn't care where she was or what she was doing, as long as she stayed away from our lives. Years later, looking back, I see those 4 years as a dark but not definitive period of my life. They left permanent marks, fundamentally changed how I view trust and family relationships, made me more cautious about assuming good intentions in other people's behavior. But they also taught me about resilience, about human capacity to survive even when survival seems impossible, about the strength of true family bonds that can be damaged but not permanently destroyed by external interference. My children carry their own scars, residual guilt for having believed the lies, anger at themselves for not questioning earlier. Therapy helps process these feelings, but I know that like me, they will probably carry some level of trauma forever. But we actively choose not to let that trauma define who we are or how we live going forward. We choose to focus on recovery, on rebuilding, on creating a new normal that honors the past but isn't imprisoned by it. The truth emerged as Beatrice promised it would. It took 4 agonizing years, but it finally came. And when it came, it brought not just reunion, but also clarity, closure, the ability to begin a process of genuine healing instead of just surviving day after day without understanding why. The woman who gave birth to me revealed herself to be a monster capable of cruelty I never imagined possible in family relationships. But the children I raised revealed themselves to be good people capable of admitting mistakes, investigating truth, and fighting for reconciliation. Today, when I sit at that large dinner table surrounded by my children, grandchildren, their partners, friends who became family, I feel complicated gratitude. Gratitude for being here, for having survived, for discovering the truth in time. But also permanent awareness of how fragile all of this is, how easily it can be lost, how much continuous work is necessary to protect and maintain healthy relationships against external and internal forces that threaten to corrupt them. My story doesn't have a perfectly happy ending because real life rarely offers that, but it has an ending where love eventually conquered lies, where truth finally emerged from beneath layers of deception, where a separated family was reunited despite seemingly impossible odds, and sometimes, after 4 years in absolute darkness, even imperfect light is enough to illuminate the path toward healing. Did you enjoy Marina's story? Then subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and comment where you're watching from. Oh, and there's another story waiting for you here on the screen. Click there and I'll wait for you.